3. Hello everybody. In the previous video we took a look at constraints in Maya, an introductory look at this technique. In this video we'll take a little bit deeper of a look into these constraints. In the previous video we constrained one object to another object. However, in Maya you can actually constrain an object to multiple objects, to two or more objects. And that's what we'll be looking at in this video. So you can see my Maya scene here, and I have three objects. I have this red one here, a yellow, and a blue object. We are going to be constraining this red object to the yellow and the blue one. We'll try a point constraint first. Now remember from the previous video that you first select the object or objects that will be influencing the constrained one. So I'm going to select the yellow and the blue objects here. And then last I will select the red one because that's what's going to be constrained. With them selected, I'll come to constrain, point. We'll open up its options and just make sure that they're reset to the default, and apply. You'll notice two things. First of all, you saw this red cone shift in position when I constrained it. What happened there? Well, it's being constrained to both the yellow and the blue object, so it found the spot exactly in the middle between the two. The second thing that you'll notice is that in the channel box here, the translate X, Y, and Z have this blue tick mark here, indicating that these values are being controlled by something else other than animation keys. You'll also notice in our outliner here that the red cone has nested underneath it a point constraint. So right now the red cone is constrained to the, in position, in 3D space, constrained to the yellow and the blue cones. So if I were to move the yellow cone, for example, you'll notice that the red cone will always stay exactly in between the two cones. In addition, if I grab the blue cone and move it, the red cone will also stay exactly in between the two objects that it's constrained to. Now, because it's a point constraint, it doesn't matter if I rotate either of these cones, they will not affect the rotation of this red object here. One other thing that I'd like you to take note of is that when you select the red object, the object that is constrained, you'll see in the channel box under shapes that there is a point constraint assigned to it, and that we have these two channels, yellow and blue, named after the objects that the red cone is constrained to. Notice that each one has a value of 1. Let's see what happens if we take that yellow value of 1 and assign it a value of 0. You'll notice now that the yellow cone has no effect on our red cone any longer. But if we move the blue cone, the red cone will move with it. I'm going to select my red cone once again, and we'll set the blue value now. We'll set it to 0, and we'll set the yellow value to 1. Now, my blue cone has no effect on the red one, but the yellow one, well, have 100% influence on the position in 3D space of our red cone. I'm going to select my red cone, and we'll put a value of 0.5 on both the yellow and the blue. So now it is once again being influenced equally by both the yellow and the blue cone. What if we want the yellow cone to have more influence on it, but not 100% influence? Let's say we want it to have 75% influence. I'll select my red cone, and under the yellow cone channel here, we'll make that 0.75, and we'll take the blue cone and make it 0.25. And now you'll see that the yellow cone has more influence than the blue one, but the blue cone still influences the red one to a degree. I'm going to go ahead and set the values back to 0.5 so that it is equally influenced by both the yellow and the blue cones. Let's try another constraint. So once again, I'm going to select the yellow and the blue, and then I'll select the red one last because it is what's going to be constrained. We'll go to Constrain, Orient this time. I'm going to reset just to make sure that I'm using the default values, and I'll apply. Now we have both a point constraint and an orient constraint on the red cone. And in fact, in the channel box, you'll see that now not only the translate X, Y, and Z values are being controlled by something else other than animation keys, but the rotate values are also now being influenced. You'll also notice here in the channel box, not only do we have our point constraint, but we also have our orient constraint as well. And let's test it out. So if I take this yellow cone and let's say I rotate it 360 degrees, you'll notice that the red cone is taking half of the rotation from this yellow cone. If I rotate the blue cone, once again you'll also see that the red cone is taking half of the blue's rotation. That is because this orient constraint is working just like the point constraint one did. So here, we'll turn this one, the blue cone, upside down, 180 degrees. And if we select the red cone, we can interpolate between these two influences here, the same way that we did with the point constraint. If I want it to be oriented like the blue one, I'll set the yellow to 0. Or I can reverse that by selecting 1 on the yellow and 0 for the blue, and now it's oriented like the blue one. Or we can do other values such as 0.75 for the yellow and 0.25 for the blue. And now it takes more rotation from the yellow than it does the blue, but the blue one still influences it to a degree. So that's a little bit about using multiple objects, constraining a object to multiple other things, using both point and orient constraint in these examples. Now this is a little bit awkward to be working this way because currently I have both a point and an orient constraint, and each of those have 2 channels on it. So for its translation and for its rotation, I actually have 4 different channels I'm working with now. That is a bit awkward to work with. However, it's totally doable. There are, however, ways that we can make it a little bit easier to work with these constraints. I'll be covering that in a future video. However, I'll show you more the end result now so that you get kind of an idea of how we might be able to work with these constraints in a more intuitive way. So I spent a little bit of time working with this using some more advanced techniques that I'll be covering in a future video, but I want to show you how I work with these constraints and make it a little bit more intuitive. You'll remember that what I showed you before was how we have both a point and an orient constraint applied to this red cone, which affects its position and rotation, which it takes from the yellow and the blue cones. The thing that made this a little bit complicated is that to get it to work, we needed to work with these two channels here under the point constraint, the yellow and the blue channels that I created, as well as the yellow and the blue channels for our orient constraint as well. So what I've done here is, if we select the red cone, I created a custom channel for it called yellow-blue, and I will be using this channel here, this one single channel, to affect those 4 different channels in my constraints. So let's see how that works. Right now, it is taking translation and rotation equally from both of these cones. What I'm going to do is take one of these cones and move it over here, and we'll rotate it as well. Maybe something like that. And you'll see that this is taking its rotation and position in 3D space equally from these 2 objects. But with this custom channel that I've created called yellow and blue, right now it's set to 0.5 for 50%. Let's see what happens when I scrub and make it go to 0. You'll see now it's taking 100% of its rotation and position from the yellow cone. And then if I increase this yellow-blue value to 1, it will now take all of its rotation and position in 3D space from the blue cone. Or if I wish, I can do any increment between those 2 values. I can, for instance, do 90%. That means then that it'll take most of its position and rotation from the blue cone. Or we can take this value down and make it maybe take more. We'll make it take perhaps 70% from the yellow cone and only 30% from the blue cone. So you might be wondering, what are the practical uses of having an object constrained to multiple other objects? And while I won't be demonstrating it in this video, let's just think of one scenario, for example, where maybe a character is holding something in his or her hand. And what if that character needs to take that object, let's say it's a book, and they need to be able to take that book and from their right hand place it into their left hand. And then maybe from their left hand they want to place it on a table. This technique of using constraints would be one way that we could accomplish that in our animations. So that's a little bit about using constraints with multiple objects. I'll see you next time.